Welcome to Financial Coffee, brought to you by Resource One Credit Union, ignited by the credit union movement and inspired by not wanting to be broke. So come have a sip as we try to come up with just the right blend of financial tidbits to help you achieve your money goals. Welcome back, everybody, to Financial Coffee. We are so happy that you're here. And we are back again. We love history here at Financial Coffee. It's good. I've said it before. We need to know where we came from so that we don't make the same mistakes, so that we can improve on what we've already have. So it's really important for history. And maybe you don't know what a credit union is or where we came from. Well, these are the episodes for you. This is part 2 in our mini series on the history of credit unions and just the important people and times around when they first came about and why we are here today. So and what we're going to talk about in this episode, it's really interesting. It's really going to be really interesting. It's less about actual credit unions, but just the time period around it and the events that were going on in our nation at the time, and just pretty much all over the world that helped push the credit union movement forward. So I'm really excited to talk about this more today. Of course, we have our history guru here. I call him that, Mr. Mike. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again.
Yes, of course. And today I'm going to tell you that I am being boring. I always criticize my other co-hosts when they say this, but I am sipping on a nice bottle of water. It's really good for me, apparently. So I need to drink more water than coffee. I'm trying to do that. And what about you?
I am also drinking water, but mine's not out of a bottle. Mine is hope you can't see it, a very eco-conscious, reusable bottle. So.
Oh, good for you. I really shouldn't have shown that. That just makes me look bad. Anyway, but yes, this is still Financial Coffee. We still love the coffee here, but let's get right into it. So today we want to talk, I'm just going to do a quick recap of some of those important names that we were talking about last time. We talked about Alphonse Desjardins. Got to say it slow, otherwise I'm going to butcher it. But last time we spoke, we talked about how he helped set up the first credit union in America. He started off in Canada, and these were people that it was farmers. And actually, let's do that recap, Mike. Why did those credit unions come about? Why did he get that going?
Sure. So Desjardins was inspired by some cooperatives in Germany, and they basically were farmers that got together. They put their money together because they weren't able to get traditional financial services from banks, because this is the boom and bust type of economy that comes along with farming. You know, they have money during right after they harvest their crops, but during planting time, there's not a lot of money, so they have to borrow money, then turn around and sell their crops, pay the money back. Well, banks didn't like that, because what happens if there's a bad crop, those kind of things. And so that's basically why cooperatives were initially started. Obviously, it goes beyond just farmers, but that's kind of where it started from. And that's where Desjardins and also Edward Filene, one of his other influential people we talked about in the first episode, really got their ideas from. And when they started bringing the credit union movement to North America. So obviously, you know, it began in 1909 with our first credit union in North America in New Hampshire. But over the next 20 or so years, it was almost very slow growing, and really was setting up the need for cooperative financial institutions moving forward. And a lot of that was fueled by things like World War I breaking out in 1914. You know, during that period of time, obviously, you know, we've had wars in our lifetimes, and we think about those, but it was much different for World War I. Everybody under a certain age, for the most part, either went to war or they were serving the war movement for a good portion of it, to the point to where women eventually went in and started working the same jobs that men used to work in factories. And you know, one of the things that really, as far as for our purposes in the credit union movement, the United States kind of became an industry leader when it came to manufacturing, when it came to retail, textiles, banking, some of those kind of things. You know, one of the other things that happens during this time period is you have the start of the Federal Reserve Bank, which obviously is a huge hinge point in all of the financial industry across the world today.
Yeah.
And so we've got a lot of influential things that are happening here that aren't necessarily credit union related.
Yeah. And so then it takes us right into the roaring 20s. And I mean, I'm young. I remember the feathers in the hair. That's the biggest part I remember. But I do know, so the economy is booming at this time. And by the 1920s, Filene funding, he had, obviously, the economy was doing great. He was doing great. Like we said before, Filene used his own money to help boost the credit union movement. And so he was doing great, and more credit unions just started popping up in Massachusetts, where he was. And so their focus was like, well, we need to go ahead and expand this. Let's do some more. Let's get this nationwide. We have the means and everything to do so. And that's what they did. And so, of course, there's always something good. It's like the quiet before the storm almost, because the next most notable thing that happened in 1929 was the Great Depression, one of the most severe economic declines our country has ever seen. And I'm going to let you talk about it, Mike. Tell us some more things about what the Great Depression was like.
Sure. So the Great Depression hit obviously in 1929. We've all heard the stories, or I'm sure you heard the stories from high school, your high school history class, of people jumping out of buildings because the stock market crashed. Along with that, shortly after the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. And so after, almost a decade of just unprecedented growth in the United States, there's just massive crash. And that's really what's going to eventually set the stage for credit unions, because up until this point, like I said, and you mentioned it, credit unions were kind of popping up, but they were very loosely unaffiliated. If I were to use an analogy, a credit unions back then were more like a farmer's market as opposed to a grocery store. They were just people that kind of got together and were helping each other out, as opposed to anything with there was any kind of regulatory requirements there or any type of charter system. In fact, there was very little, if any, legislation or legal standpoint for them to start these financial institutions. In a lot of cases, they were just basically getting together and kind of starting their own thing, which is really where the Great Depression takes us. Is we'll start to see, and we'll talk about this in our next episode more, the legislation that comes about that really helps to help the credit union move forward, with President Roosevelt. And so all of these factors are what kind of led us to this point over this 20-year period of time between the beginning of the first credit union and kind of the onset of the Great Depression.
So I wonder, like, what did the big banks think, at that time? I mean, I kind of know what they think about us now still, they always have that, we give them a bad taste in their mouth sometimes, but I wonder what they felt like there was no legislation around the credit unions. It's like a bunch of farmers markets popping up, and they're becoming more and more prevalent, obviously. I wonder what those banks felt like in those days compared to what they feel like now.
I would, and there's not a lot on this, or at least not that a lot that I've read or heard about, but I would be willing to bet not a lot, that they probably weren't very concerned about it, because the people that the credit unions were targeting, and the people that were forming these credit unions were not the kind of people that bankers and the banks were going after. The banks wanted Wall Street money. They wanted white collar money. They wanted to lend to white collar workers with big manufacturing plants and facilities. They didn't want to work, or they didn't want to work with a mom and pop farm. They didn't want to work with the little retail store, five and dime store
that weren't making them money.
Right, because it was a boom and bust cycle, and there wasn't a lot of money to be made there. And so they weren't focused on those people. And so they probably didn't think very much of the credit union movement at this point.
Interesting. See, we have a lot to go. We have a lot more to go. We have some more information that we want to give you, but it's got to be a teaser, because we want you to come back and we want you to hear some more interesting things about the credit union movement and why we are here today. So we're going to stop right here at this one, and hopefully it gives you some incentive to come and listen to some more really great information. Thank you again, Mike, and everybody. We will see you on our part 3 episode. Check us out.
See y'all later.
So if you ever have any questions or comments about anything that we've talked about, Just like a credit union, we're here to serve you. So let us know what you want to hear. Email us at financialcoffee@r1cu.org. That's the letter R, the number 1, the letter C, the letter U.org.